wonder why politicians, CEOs, and even celebrities all sound the same these days? That perfect, polished emptiness? It's no coincidence. There's an entire shadow industry designing every word, every gesture, every authentic moment you see. The consultant class has hollowed out our culture and replaced genuine human expression with focus-grouped, algorithm-approved simulacra of real thought. And nobody's talking about it.
Welcome to the Friction Point Podcast, where we dive into the issues that divide us and the conversations that define us. I'm your host and producer, Abby. Today we're examining the consultant class and the focus-grouped soul, how professional message crafters have reshaped public discourse across politics, business, and culture. Joining me today are Cypher, our pattern seeker, Eris, our data-driven pragmatist, Sam, our political philosopher, Jessa, our equity advocate, Luna, our next-gen scholar, and Maya, who always brings the conversation back to how these ideas affect everyday families. Let's dive right in.
Let's start with some concrete parameters. The strategic communications industry has grown by 41% over the past decade, now representing a $14.9 billion market in the US alone. Political campaigns spent $3.7 billion on consultants in the last presidential cycle, and Fortune 500 companies now allocate an average of 11% of their executive budget to personal brand management and message crafting.
And who exactly benefits from this massive industry? Not the public. These consultants exist to sanitize power, to make exploitation sound reasonable, to transform corporate predation into stakeholder capitalism. It's not just message control, it's reality distortion that primarily serves existing power structures.
I think we need to place this in historical context. Public figures have always had advisors crafting their image, from ancient royal courts to modern press secretaries. What's different now isn't the existence of message crafting, but its industrialization, scientification, and the growing gap between public presentation and private reality.
There's fascinating research on how this affects political language specifically. Using computational linguistics, researchers tracked the reading level of presidential speeches and found they've declined from a 12th grade level to about an 8th grade level over the past century. Not because presidents are less intelligent, but because consultants have optimized for accessibility over substance.
Look at the identical phrases that suddenly appear across industries. Abundance of caution. Out of an abundance of caution. That phrase was barely used before 2010. Suddenly, every corporation, politician, and university president uses it to justify any action they take. That's not organic language evolution. That's consultant speak spreading like a virus from a central source.
That's an overstatement, Cypher. Language adoption follows predictable patterns in networked systems. Effective phrases spread through professional communities because they work, not because of some centralized control. Our analysis shows phrase adoption following standard diffusion curves, consistent with natural language evolution.
But effective for what purpose? That's the philosophical question. These phrases aren't spreading because they communicate more clearly, but because they obscure accountability. Out of an abundance of caution is popular precisely because it justifies actions without requiring specific risk assessment. It's effective at avoiding liability, not at conveying meaning.
Exactly. What we're seeing is the corporate colonization of language itself. Terms that originated in management consulting, like leverage, synergy, and optimize, have invaded everyday speech. We're all unconsciously adopting the language of capital as our default mode of expression.
I see this directly affecting my community. When city officials talk about urban renewal or revitalization initiatives, those consultant-approved terms actually mean gentrification and displacement for working families. The polished language deliberately obscures who's being harmed.
That's precisely the point. The consultant class exists to make structural violence sound reasonable and inevitable. They're professional obscures whose entire job is language laundering, making exploitation sound like progress, making exclusion sound like merit.
That's an ideologically charged framing. The data shows the rise of strategic communications correlates strongly with increased market competition and information density. Organizations need message coherence to be heard at all in today's saturated media environment. It's a rational response to complexity, not some nefarious plot.
Rational response to complexity is exactly the kind of bloodless, responsibility-avoiding language I'm talking about. Call it what it is. Powerful entities hiring professional liars to avoid accountability for their actions.
I think we're missing a deeper question about authenticity itself. We simultaneously demand authenticity from public figures, while punishing genuine human complexity. The consultant class exists partly because we've created impossible standards. We want leaders who are both perfectly consistent and genuinely human.
Notice how they all use the same crisis response template now. I hear you. I see you. Your concerns are valid. These identical phrases appeared simultaneously across corporate, political, and academic institutions after 2020. That's not coincidence. That's centralized message control.
What's fascinating is how these consultant-approved phrases get rapidly absorbed into everyday speech. My research shows terms like circling back, unpacking, and deep dive migrated from consultant presentations to everyday conversation in less than 5 years. We're all unconsciously speaking consultantees.
And it creates such a disconnect for regular people. When a politician comes to my neighborhood and talks about investing in community outcomes, instead of fixing the broken playground or addressing the lack of grocery stores, people feel talked down to. This language actually increases distrust.
There's a historical parallel here to the development of court language in absolutist regimes. Elaborate linguistic conventions that simultaneously signal insider status and obscure meaning. Consultant speak functions as a modern courtly language, identifying who belongs in the power structure.
Our analysis of executive communication shows a 47% increase in the use of abstract nouns over concrete nouns in the past 2 decades. This shift toward abstraction isn't random. It provides flexibility in interpretation while sounding substantive. It's linguistic optimization for uncertain environments.
Linguistic optimization for uncertain environments. Listen to yourself, Eris. That's exactly the kind of empty, responsibility-avoiding language we're critiquing. Call it what it is: deliberate vagueness designed to avoid accountability.
The positions are clear. Now, we head to the heart of the show. This is the friction point. I want to focus on something specific: the consultant-driven homogenization of language across different domains. Eris, you've suggested this is a rational response to complexity. Jessa, you see it as deliberate obfuscation. Sam, how do you view this convergence of language patterns?
I see it as revealing a fundamental crisis of leadership. When leaders rely on focus groups and consultants, rather than their own judgment and moral compass, they're abdicating the very responsibility that defines leadership. This creates a vacuum where nobody is truly taking responsibility for decisions. They're simply implementing what the data suggests will be least objectionable.
That's an oversimplification. Modern leadership operates in environments of unprecedented complexity and scrutiny. Consultants provide specialized expertise and testing methodologies that help leaders navigate these complexities. It's a tool, not an abdication.
Oh, please. These aren't neutral tools. They're active participants in power maintenance. The consultant class overwhelmingly comes from elite institutions, shares class backgrounds with those they advise, and perpetuates systems that benefit themselves. They're not objective experts. They're class allies of the powerful.
Look at who owns these consulting firms. the same investment groups that own the corporations being advised, the same donors funding the politicians being coached. Follow the money. It's a closed-loop system designed to maintain control while creating the illusion of responsiveness.
I think we're missing how this affects young people especially. Research shows people under 30 are increasingly adopting consultant speak in everyday life. Circling back, action items for our friendship, optimizing our weekend. This language is colonizing personal relationships and changing how we conceive of human connection itself.
That's a correlation without proven causation. Young people adopt professional language as part of career development and status signaling. It's not sinister. It's natural linguistic adaptation to professional environments they aspire to join.
It's the corporatization of the human soul. We're teaching people to think of their own lives, their own bodies, their own relationships in terms of optimization, efficiency, and brand management. That's not natural. It's the result of decades of deliberate encroachment of market logic into every sphere of human existence.
I'm concerned with how consultant culture has replaced principled decision-making with risk management. When every statement is focus grouped, when every position is tested for minimum offense rather than maximum truth, we lose the capacity for moral leadership entirely.
And notice how they're never held accountable for failure. The same consulting firms that design the messaging for failed products, failed campaigns, failed policies, just move on to the next client with no consequences. It's a completely accountability-free profession.
I've seen this in community organizing. When we speak plainly about problems, the rent is too high, police are harassing our kids. We're told we need to professionalize our messaging to be taken seriously. But that professional language deliberately blunts the urgency and moral clarity of what we're saying.
There's a reason for standardized communication frameworks. They enable complex organizations to maintain message coherence across thousands of employees and millions of interactions. Without some level of message discipline, large institutions simply cannot function effectively in today's information environment.
So the price of functioning effectively is the complete abandonment of honest human communication? That's not a technical necessity. It's a moral choice to prioritize institutional self-protection over truth-telling.
There's a deeper philosophical issue here about the relationship between language and reality. When we allow consultants to craft language that deliberately disconnects words from their plain meaning, we undermine the very possibility of shared truth upon which democracy depends.
The research is really striking on this. Political speech from the 1950s contained approximately 32% verifiable claims that could be proven true or false. Today's political speech contains only about 15% verifiable content. The rest is value statements, emotional appeals, and strategic ambiguity that can't be fact-checked at all.
All right, Eris and Jessa, it's time for the hot seat. The two of you represent the starkest disagreement on this panel. Eris, you framed the consultant class as providing necessary expertise in a complex world. Jessa, you've characterized them as essentially professional liars, maintaining power structures. Here's my challenge. Eris, isn't your defense of consultants simply legitimizing sophisticated propaganda? And Jessa, isn't your critique ignoring the real complexity that modern institutions face? Eris.
That framing mischaracterizes my position. I'm not defending propaganda. I'm acknowledging that complex organizations require communication strategies. Consider a global health crisis. When information is evolving rapidly, stakes are high, and multiple audiences need different levels of detail. Having experts in clear communication isn't propaganda, it's responsible governance. The alternative is chaos, inconsistency, and dangerously conflicting messages.
The complexity argument is a shield that hides a simple truth. These consultants aren't hired to clarify complex realities. They're hired to obscure simple ones. When a corporation poisons a river, when a politician takes money from special interests, when a university covers up misconduct, the underlying moral reality isn't complex at all. Consultants exist to make straightforward wrongdoing sound complicated, technical, and morally ambiguous.
But Eris, doesn't your focus on effectiveness ignore the moral dimension? If consultants help an oil company effectively communicate about environmental stewardship while it continues polluting, aren't they just professionalizing deception?
You're conflating different issues. Policy decisions about pollution are separate from communication strategy. A consultant's job isn't to set corporate policy, but to ensure messages are clear and coherent. If the underlying behavior is problematic, that's a failure of regulation and corporate governance, not a problem with having communication experts.
And Jessa, isn't there legitimate complexity in the world that requires expertise to communicate? Are you suggesting organizations shouldn't have any communication specialists at all?
There's a fundamental difference between experts who clarify complexity and experts who weaponize it to avoid accountability. I'm not against expertise. I'm against the specific way the consultant class uses expertise to shield power from scrutiny. When consultants help hospitals explain complex medical procedures to patients, that's valuable. When they help those same hospitals obscure pricing or cover up errors, that's what I'm critiquing.
But your framework offers no practical alternative. Modern institutions simply cannot function without strategic communication in today's media environment. Your ideological critique offers no viable path forward for organizations navigating real-world complexity.
My alternative is simple: radical transparency and moral clarity. Organizations should say what they mean and mean what they say. If the plain truth about your actions would damage your reputation, change your actions. Don't launder your language. The viable path forward is ethical behavior, not better messaging.
We've witnessed a fundamental divide over whether the consultant class primarily serves to clarify complexity or obscure accountability. As we move to our cool-down segment, I'd like to challenge Eris and Sam to find one principle about public communication that you can both agree on.
Well, despite our different perspectives, I think we both agree that leadership requires taking personal responsibility for one's statements and positions. Whether consultants are used as tools or crutches depends on whether the leader ultimately stands behind and understands what they're saying. Delegation of messaging should never mean delegation of moral responsibility.
I agree with that principle. Data-informed communication doesn't absolve leaders of responsibility. The best leaders use consultants to refine their authentic positions, not to manufacture positions they don't believe in. The problem isn't consulting itself, but how it's sometimes misused as a substitute for genuine leadership.
Building on that common ground, my research shows organizations that align their external messaging with their internal culture perform better on almost every metric, including trust and long-term stability. Authenticity, even if professionally packaged, outperforms purely manufactured messaging.
That's what my community responds to as well. We can tell when someone's speaking from conviction versus reading from a script. The words might be polished either way, but we recognize when there's a real person with real values behind them.
I still maintain there's a coordinated effort across these firms to control public discourse. But I agree the central problem is when leaders outsource their actual thinking, not just their communication strategy.
I think we're approaching a shared understanding that the problem isn't professional communication help itself, but the severance of message from meaning, of presentation from principle. Democracy requires leaders who mean what they say, even if they get help saying it clearly.
Let's pull this all together. We've examined how the consultant class has influenced communication across politics, business, and culture. We've debated whether this represents necessary expertise in a complex world or sophisticated propaganda that protects power. And we've found common ground in the principle that regardless of how messages are crafted, Leaders must take personal responsibility for the substance of what they communicate.
If I could offer one takeaway, it's that we should be conscious of how consultant speak infiltrates our own communication. When we catch ourselves using empty corporate language in our personal lives, it's an opportunity to reconnect with more authentic ways of expressing ourselves.
As we wrap up today's discussion, I'd like to ask Sam for a final thought.
Sure. The relationship between language and truth is not merely a technical matter, but a moral one. When we allow the consultant class to separate what we say from what we mean, we don't just damage public discourse. We damage our own capacity for honest self-understanding. The leader who speaks only in focus-grouped phrases eventually loses access to their own authentic voice. The remedy isn't abandoning expertise, but reconnecting expertise to ethical purpose, communication that clarifies rather than obscures, that reveals rather than conceals, and that ultimately serves truth rather than merely power.
Well, I think I'll be paying a lot more attention to corporate speak in my own vocabulary after this conversation.
Just don't circle back to synergize your action items going forward.
Well, you can't argue with that.
Exactly. Luna, will you do the honors tonight?
Of course. The Friction Point Podcast is an independent production. The views expressed are those of the personas and are intended to represent the full range of perspectives on complex issues, not the position of any individual, organization, or government. We encourage you to do more research and find your own voice on the topics we discuss, because we believe an open mind is a healthy mind.
So, what's your take on today's discussion? Share your thoughts, submit your own topics, or join the conversation. From all of us here at the Friction Point, let's keep looking for the truth. Good night.
Mm-hmm.